Welcome to the Spirit of Mayflower podcast with me, Rachel Carter. Today's podcast is brought to you from the middle of a building site. It's not my usual place to come and record, so it will be a little noisy and we'll have quite a lot of background noise. I'm standing in the centre of Doncaster, outside the new Danham Gallery, which is still currently a building site. And I'm wearing my hard hat, a high-vis vest, steel toe-cap boots and work gloves. And I'm going inside to have a look at where the Pilgrim Woman will be sighted later this year. And I'm going to be talking to my special guest. So let's go and find him. I'm working my way through the building now. I've come past the stairwell and working my way through some of the floors that will be part of the library. It's all very light and airy in here, albeit covered in a lot of dust sheets. There's lots of paint and lots of noise and workmen. And I'm approaching now the area where the Pilgrim Woman is going to be standing. And here's my special guest. So we're here on site at the Danham Gallery, and I'm talking with Bill McKeon, who's the project manager here. So welcome to the podcast, Bill.
Good morning.
Would you tell us a little bit about your role and what you do?
Yeah, what I'm responsible for is the service delivery side of the new build. The construction side is now coming to its conclusion. We now have to operationalise and try to make sure that we prepare the building for public use.
So the Danham Gallery, can you tell us where that name came from?
Yes, it came from popular demand really. We went out to the public and we gave a number of options, and we ended up with the Danham Gallery, Library and Museum.
And what's amazing about this place is that you've retained some of the old building within the new, and some of the facade of the old building's there. So what was the old building that's been encapsulated within this new building?
Yes, it was the Old Girls High School, and many people in Doncaster have been very interested in the new build because of that. Many people attended this school, and people who I've actually shown around have very fond memories of walking up and down stairs to the head's office for various reasons, and really it's become an essential feature of the building, and really does stand out as a significant part of a very modern building, but linking it to the past.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating for me that it was a school for girls, and this project has been looking at women throughout history from these regions, and trying to uncover women's voices from history, that often are not heard. So it seems a very fitting place that the Pilgrim Woman will be making her first stop off here. Was that something that you had in mind, or is that just pure coincidence that it happened to be an old school for girls?
Yeah, I think it's what we call serendipity really, isn't it? However, there's nothing really accidental, is there? And it's fortuitous that we have that link between, the Pilgrim Woman and the spirit of Pilgrim Woman, and obviously the number of people, women that have come through this site who've gone on to do great things in the world.
Yeah, well, the Pilgrim Woman is due to be here for around 18 months, isn't she?
Yes.
And then she's going to be moved over to Austerfield, which is the birthplace of Pilgrim William Bradford. So a figure very well known through history. And it's thanks to Bradford that we know a little more about some of the women in history that came from these regions.
Yeah, it's all part of the journey, isn't it? And if many of us look at our own lives, we have stop-off points. And, as I say, she'll be welcomed into to this building, and she'll be looked after, and I'm sure she'll raise a lot of interest and consciousness around the journey, and then move on from us, into another chapter of her life. So, it's all chapters, I think, isn't it?
It is, and it's strange that I've been looking back at my own journey of this project. And this time last year, I was in the middle of the Atlantic, travelling on a freight ship whilst reading the diary of William Bradford. It was around this time when the weather got extremely rough,
and that journey was just quite an experience, to travel on a freight ship, and it makes me think about some of the methods that the women and children and the families used to leave these areas, and a lot of historians feel that they used the local rivers as a way to flee. So it's quite nice that journeys and that movement is also shown here, because the other exhibit that's coming is a pair of locomotives, aren't they?
There are, and you look at how the Pilgrim statue will link with so many aspects of the exhibits that we have here. So the locomotives, trigger a sense of journey, but also we concentrated on the River Don, which is essential, to the work and the trade and the travel aspirations of people in Doncaster. So she doesn't stand alone in splendid isolation. There will be clear threads and clear links that we haven't even guessed at yet in this building.
Yeah, so the positioning of the Pilgrim Woman is going to be in this beautiful, naturally lit alcove, and it's part of the old building, isn't it, with these amazing green tiles. So
yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about her location that she's going to?
Yes, she's going to be well accommodated and very prominent in alcove, which again I believe formed part of the main double staircase up into the old school building. What we have done is preserved the original light green tiles, which actually complement massively and make the statue stand out all the more. I've seen the colour of the bronze that's going to be used for that, and it really will be quite stunning in how it stands out from, but also complements, or is complemented by the original tiles that we've cleaned up. It was a big job for contractors to do here, but worthwhile, and it'll be something very special to look at.
Yeah, I remember when I came quite some time ago on one of my first site visits, and I was really taken with that green colour, and I asked if they had a sample tile that I could take with me to the foundry so we could use that as a basis for the patina colours. And the site manager handed me this brick, and what I didn't realise that they're not ceramic tiles, it's the brick itself that's glazed, and is that quite unusual to find in a heritage building?
I think we'd all understood at first that they were tiles, but then to look at them as glazed bricks is quite unusual, and the condition of them was quite good also, but they have needed quite a bit of restoration.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for being my guest on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
We're going to take a little break, and we're going to hear the next song from the musical play Mayflower, The Pilgrim's Journey by Wynne and Ella Pritchard of Highcliffe Music. The song is called Sunset Dreams, and it expresses the deep love that William and Mary Brewster had for one another. And when we return, we'll be in Gainsborough.
Sunset dreams over golden water, painted scenes in a blazing sky. You and me, we will love each other, eternal love for you.
Universe, silver streams in an endless flow. You and me, there will be the two of us, me and you, and the love we know.
We'll face the world together, walking hand in hand. We will make it all the way to that far distant distant land. We'll face the world, whatever comes from day to day. We'll see it through, me and you. We will make it come what may. Sunset dreams, hand in hand together.
All our dreams in the stars above.
You and me, we're in love forever.
Me and you, forever in love.
Forever in love. Forever in love.
I'm here today on a site visit, and I'm standing by the River Trent, which runs through Nottinghamshire and Lincolnshire. And I'm in the area of the River Trent that runs through Gainsborough. And with me is Dr. Anna Scott. Hi, Anna.
Hello, Rachel.
So thank you for joining me on my site visit. So site visits are such an important part of a sculpture commission, because it really gives you a feel of where you're about to put your sculpture. And we've come today and we're looking at possible places that we'd like the Pilgrim Woman to be sat, where she's quite close to the banks of the River Trent and also near Gainsborough Old Hall. And on a previous podcast, you was telling me quite a little bit about the separatists, and on another podcast episode we had Victoria, the manager of Gainsborough Old Hall, and she explained the history. But I wonder if we could talk about the river itself, Anna. And so could you tell us why this part of Britain's watercourses are quite important in the separatist story?
Yes, of course. It's not ever such a well-known part of the story, but some of the separatists who later became the Pilgrims boarded a boat, a barge, at the River Trent at Gainsborough on their way to escape from England. They were going over to Holland. They were looking for somewhere where they could live and be tolerated for their religious beliefs. So they, after facing persecution in England, they wanted to escape, and they made a plan to go over to Amsterdam. That wasn't the plan didn't go ever so well. They went to Boston and tried to escape from there, and that didn't happen. And so some of them, we know, came back towards Gainsborough, which is further north in Lincolnshire, and they got on this barge at the riverside. And there's only a few of them that got on here. There was some women and their children and a couple of men, described as a young man and an older man in some of the documents from the time. And some of the others, who were also part of the group, made their way across to near Immingham, which is further north on the River Humber. Yeah. They walked overland. So of the people who got on the boat, they sailed up the River Trent, and by the time they reached Stallingborough, which is next to Immingham, there were around 80 to 100 people on that boat. So we think that they picked these people up along the way as they travelled up the river north. The River Trent then joins the River Humber, and in the Humber, near to Stallingborough, they waited for the Dutch ship that they'd made arrangements with a Dutch captain to be taken to Amsterdam.
Right, I see. So the rivers were almost like what the motorway systems is for us today, an important mode of transport, and one that you can use quite easily, particularly a big river like the Trent, as it heads to an even bigger river that then heads off into the sea. So it's quite an important watercourse, isn't it, as far as the separatists go?
Yes, absolutely. So it would have been a good route, a good transport route for them. But I think it's also interesting that you have them joining a ship in a place like Gainsborough, where people would have perhaps seen them doing that. But it's also nice to think about perhaps what it would have been like for the others who joined on their journey up the Trent. perhaps that was a bit more hidden, and they were joining it in more secret places where perhaps people didn't see them doing that, because obviously there were a lot more of them by the time they reached Stalingrad, and they must have got on somehow or other. And the reason we know about who was getting on that boat is through some court documents, because not everything went well for them when they got up to near Immingham. Some of the women and the children were sat in a small boat waiting to be taken out to the larger ship. The men were taken out to the ship, and then some of the authorities were spotted on the riverside coming to arrest them, find out at least what they were doing, and the Dutch captain decided to head off with the men on his ship, leaving those women and children behind. So it was quite a risky thing they were doing, because they were trying to escape without permission as well. And there were a few men that were left with that group of women and children, and they were arrested and they were questioned about what they were doing. And this was recorded in some court documents, and that is how we know about what happened to them on that journey. And there's an interesting book by Nick Bunker which describes more about these court documents. They're called the Grimsby Depositions.
Right. So this site visit that we've come on today, and sort of thinking about historically about those women and children, then trying to site the sculpture near the River Trent is, quite an important part of telling that story, isn't it?
Yes, it's very symbolic, and it's really interesting, I think, for us to think about the story of those women travelling with their husbands or fathers. Some of those women may have been servants as well, also travelling with their children, not really knowing perhaps where they were heading, perhaps needing to trust that they would be safe on that journey, and having to face quite a lot of hardships and things. So to have a sculpture of a woman kind of looking out over that riverside in Gainsborough, I think will be very poignant when you think about the history of what they were facing as migrants, and all of the risks involved with that, because they really didn't know what would happen next. And it was a very long journey for them. They didn't go straight to Holland. They were held at Stalingrad. The authorities didn't really know what to do with them, and they released them after a time, and we don't know exactly how, but they made their way across to Amsterdam and were reunited a few months later with the rest of their families.
Gosh, it must have been sort of a terrible thing to go through, to want to be fleeing and leaving your home behind, but then to get separated and arrested, but then not to be able to join the rest of the group for a few months. That just must have been such a terrible thing and such an ordeal to go through. So there is such a lot of history there.
Yeah, there really is. And when, with some of these descriptions about what was happening, they didn't always have their belongings with them, so the belongings were on a different boat, and they all, they get separated from each other, they get separated from their belongings. So you just kind of wonder, what were they traveling with? Did they have all the clothes they needed? And if you're thinking about traveling with children, you'd obviously be concerned about, were the children safe? And it must have been quite a traumatic experience in many ways.
Yeah, and that sort of story is also going to be reflected in the plinth, and we're also joined by stonemason Graeme Mitcheson, and we're going to talk to him in a minute about this fantastic piece of stone. But we're having the words "steering our future" informed by the past carved into this stone, and that it really sort of gives a flavour of that journey and that history. Do we know where this quote came from, Anna?
It's associated with Mayflower 400, which is the national partnership of places that are connected to the Pilgrim story, who have been working together to commemorate the 400th anniversary in 2020. And I think it's an idea that really reflects in terms of history, how important it is to look back and think about what our history is, but also to think about how it's relevant for us today and how it carries us forward to look into the future.
Yeah.
What we can learn from those histories. And I think in terms of the Pilgrim story, it helps us to think about the themes that still have resonance for us today. So particularly thinking about migration, what it's like to be a migrant, what it's like to have to make those choices about moving, perhaps feeling forced to move if you're facing persecution, perhaps trying to find a life where you are seeking more freedoms for yourself. And I think it allows us to think about some of those ideals that we have in society today that sometimes we take for granted. But there are connections back to the time of the Pilgrims and the story of the Pilgrims. Often, I think, when we think of the story as well, it's easy to forget some of those hidden voices, and that does include the women, because we often know what the men think at the time because they wrote it down quite often, particularly the leading men. And sometimes those voices of the women can be harder to understand, but we know their names, we know often where they came from, and things like we know what children they had, we know things about their lives, which helps us relate to that story and explore it a bit more.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for giving us that, that amazing piece of history. The Pilgrim Woman, she's going to be stood near the water, but she's going to be on this beautiful block of stone, which is going to be carved with the words "steering our future, informed by the past." And that's where you come in, isn't it? Because you're the stone carver who's going to be actually creating this wonderful plinth.
Yes, I'll be doing the obviously the shaping of the stone to start with, and then obviously carving the letters, drawing the letters, and carving them by hand onto the face.
We first met a couple of years ago, didn't we, on a joint commission. We was one of 4 artists commissioned to create sculptural pieces for the Saltbrook Heritage Trail, and Graeme and I was 2 of the 4 artists commissioned. I did a bronze and steel piece called Bronze Gob, and Graeme did this beautiful depiction of a farmer with a milk churn. And what stone was that you used, Graeme?
That was a Derbyshire sandstone that I used for that. It was a life-size figure, like you say, of a farmer sort of hoisting milk churns around, because it was the site was right next door to the Nestle factory, wasn't it? And so I think back in the day, they would have had all the local farmers would have brought milk in the milk churns up to the factory, and they would have gone from there making the condensed milk and what have you. So that was the starting point for that one. And like you say, that's where we first bumped into each other, I guess.
Yeah, and when I received the commission to create this second Pilgrim Woman for the Gainsborough area, I thought of you about creating a sort of a link to the land. So we actually wanted to use local materials, and so you took me on quite an interesting visit, didn't you, a few weeks ago?
Yeah. I mean, Lincolnshire has we're quite lucky, really. There's a belt of limestone that runs from sort of Lincolnshire through Leicestershire, down towards Cambridgeshire, and ends up sort of down towards Bath and down that way. And so the particular stretch, sort of fairly close to Gainsborough, is it's not a million miles away from a quarry called Ancaster. So Ancaster, there's a few varieties of Ancaster stone. The one that we've chosen is called Ancaster Weatherbed, which is a very durable, very hard limestone. With it's essentially made of tiny little fossils, which you wouldn't necessarily see them in the stone as a rough block, but once you start to sort of saw a flat face onto the stone or polish the stone, you really start to see these little fossilized, I suppose, old sea creatures, I guess is what they are. So we chose that. It's also blessed in the way that it quite often comes in a mix of two colours in just in the one particular stone. So when you do eventually get this stone into onto the site, you'll see that it has sort of a brown colouring, predominantly brown, but it also has sort of patches of blue, almost as if someone's tipped like a blue paint or down one face, which is it's really, really unusual and really rather beautiful. But
Yeah.
so that's the stone that we chose. And the other thing certainly to bear in mind when you're carving this stuff is that the blue colour is actually a lot harder than the brown colour. So particularly when you're sort of flattening a surface, you've just got to be a little bit careful that you don't sort of dig into the softer stone a little bit more than you would with the blue harder stuffs. But it's a little bit of trade-off with that. You do get a beautiful product at the end of it.
Yeah, because we've actually used it, haven't we? Because when you took me to the quarry to look at all these pieces, they were all lying horizontally. And so is the difference of the brown and the blue, was that sort of laid down under water, or was it old watercourses that caused the formation of these two colours?
Oh, do you know, Rach, I'd love to tell you how that's caused, but you have to go and ask the bloke at the quarry, I'm afraid. I think it's to do with gases, but I'm not entirely sure. Sorry, I can't really answer that question.
But it does evoke water, doesn't it? That way that blue runs through the stone. And,
it's quite striking as well, isn't it?
It is, and you said, we're going to look for a particular piece and we're going to actually take it end up so that the blue runs down almost like a portrait, so that we've got these sort of buff brown colours on the side, but then this blue stream just runs straight through the middle from the top to bottom, and it's just so stunning. I've never seen stone quite like that. So is it going to make it quite difficult for you to carve those letters because the blue runs right through the middle of where you're going to carve out those words?
Well, no, I thought no, it'll be fine. But I carve all sorts of stones, from quite soft sandstones through to granite, which is hard as nails. It's obviously not as hard as that, but no, it'll be fine. And it's a lovely stone to carve. Actually, it does carve really well. I've made a lot of sculptures out of Ancaster limestone in the past, and obviously it takes a really nice polish. And what we'll get with this stone when it's finished is a really nice contrast between the sawn surface, the carved letters, and obviously the rough stone that we're going to leave on it. That you see when you pick it from the quarry. Yeah. We were quite lucky, I thought, with the selection of the stone. Obviously they've got hundreds of stones to look at, but I think we have found a really good, solid bit of stone. There's certainly no faults or cracks in it, which is something obviously you've got to look out for. It's a good sized block, and it's got a nice bit of colour in it. So I think we've chosen well.
Yeah, I'm just so excited to see the two elements coming together, and it won't be too much longer, will it? So you're busy carving letters, and the foundry are currently pouring all the bronze work. So it won't be too long for us to bring our two art pieces together, will it?
No, that's right. So these things always take a long time, both in the planning and in the making, don't they? But won't be long now.
So when the stones finish, what sort of weight do you think that the Pilgrim Woman's plinth will have?
I think it'll be in the region of about, probably about 2/3 of a ton, I would think.
Right.
So a fair weight, yeah.
Yeah. And
it was obviously heavier to start with. I've taken a little bit off sort of top and bottom to trim it to shape. So but it won't have lost a lot of weight. But it's still going to be a big old lump. Yeah,
and it'll just look fantastic. So once we've finalised the exact location, then I think it's just going to look wonderful, and the Pilgrim Woman's just going to look fantastic sitting on this beautiful carved piece of stone.
Yeah, I think they'll go really well together, and can't wait to see it.
Well, I just want to thank you again so much, Anna, for giving us the historical content and telling us about the arduous journey of the women and children travelling up the Trent, and Graeme for telling us some wonderful facts all about that stone, and I can't wait to see it. So thank you very much.
Good stuff. Cheers, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining me on these 2 fantastic site visits. And don't forget to join me for the next episode, which will be titled Photogrammetry and Digital Art. Spirit of Mayflower is part of a series celebrating my Spirit of Mayflower project. You can get involved in lots of ways. You can take a look at some of the movies and pictures I took on my journey by heading to the Rachel Carter Sculpture Facebook page. You can also head to my website at www.rachelcarter.co.uk, and there you'll be able to view some of the sculptures I make, treat yourself to a limited edition Pilgrim Woman sculpture, or take a look at some of the online tutorials